All right, it is 6 o'clock. Let's officially call this meeting of the Carlisle Borough Truth and Reconciliation Commission to order. Welcome, everyone. Our first item of business is the approval of the October 10th minutes. Would anyone like to make a motion to approve those minutes?
I move that we approve.
Okay, Member Razanauskas moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Member Wardebuck seconds. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Okay, the minutes are approved. Our first item of business is actually old business. It's the future of this commission. As all of you know, we've been working asynchronously on a number of reports and things. And if we can all get the draft report that combines all of our subgroups reports together, there is a section in that report entitled Future of the Commission's Work, where there is a draft proposal that we can use as a basis of discussion. Obviously, we didn't have a chance to discuss this last time, so when you locate that part of the draft report, it's on page 15. And let me share this with you, Sean, because I don't think you're on here. Oh, great. Okay. So let's just take a moment to read that, and then, or should I read it for those who might be watching or listening? Okay. Here's the proposal. The Carlisle Borough Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Okay, we already found a missing word here. Functioned more like a task force with a comparatively short timeline and limited charge. While the TRC was able to research, critically examine, and ultimately recommend several action steps in that period of time, more work remains to be done, and the implementation of those action steps will require the sustained engagement of a board or commission. Thus, we recommend the establishment of an implementation committee similar in composition and charge to the Climate Action Committee. Furthermore, we recommend that the aforementioned committee be charged with researching the efficacy of a permanent investment in a chief diversity officer for the borough and making a recommendation to the council within 12 months of its formation. Finally, we recommend that the committee be charged with holding regular events for the purpose of facilitating the collection of feedback from borough residents and other interested parties and supporting the reconciliation process on the model of the TRC's signature event, Thinking About Race Thursdays. The council may, of course, assign other duties to the proposed committee as it sees fit. We emphasize the two charges delineated here because the TRC finds them merit-worthy and was unable to fully develop them in the time allotted. Thoughts?
When I had read this initially, and I'm still thinking about it, it reads like this is sort of an interim step to something else, perhaps, or not in the future. Is that, would that be accurate? Sort of a bridging action? Because clearly we know that this is going to have to be perennial. The effort, not necessarily our body, but the effort, it has to be one that continues in perpetuity. So do committees, and maybe my knowledge, do committees in the borough go on in perpetuity? Is there a formal structure where committees have deadlines, and after that committee has got to be something else or resolved or something?
We have a number of committees that are standing committees of the borough. I mean, simple examples are the Planning Commission, the Parks and Recreation Committee. We have a number of committees. So we would just need to establish that by ordinance.
Okay. So we could ask here, or recommend here, that it be a standing. Is that a form of standing committee? Would
Right.
would that be more explicit?
I think we could.
Okay.
Is that something we want to consider? You're right that it's kind of a bridging step because I think that's something that we haven't had enough time to really think about. I'm not sure what most promising practices are. Do
Right.
you get a chief diversity officer in place and then that person helps to structure the more standing committee, or does it work in the other direction? I'm not really
Right.
sure.
Yeah. And are we locking ourselves into standing right up front, or is that something that a recommendation that might be made or not later? Or should it be right here, right up front, standing and then press on?
I need help understanding what a diversity officer does, because a lot of what needs to happen is policy needs, things that are embedded in policy that result in harms to specific people needs to be taken out. Is that what a diversity officer does?
I think that's the question. I think we're living through a period of time where we're really seeing the beginning of chief diversity officers being in roles in all sorts of organizations. And I think ideally it would be a person who would help to guide that policy. But I think what the suggestion here is, and it's just a suggestion, is that this implementation committee could look further into what are the best structures and compositions of people for bringing forward policy change.
This is just my thought, so sharing. So creating a new role versus making the roles that are in place be accountable to be that way, right?
I don't think it's a disjunction. I think that in an ideal case, someone like a chief diversity officer would help generate some accountability. But it's also the case that I think there are other structures that don't involve a chief diversity officer where accountability is pursued in other ways. And I think that's exactly what we're tasking this implementation committee with, if we choose to go this way, with determining is what is the best way to achieve accountability.
Thanks, that really helps. Yeah.
Let me, if I may, ask this question. It's just sort of, I don't have an answer. We're making, the final report is making recommendations to borough officials, council, and the mayor. Two questions. First, would our recommendation with respect to what we might do with this standing committee, would that have something to do with how many of the recommendations are considered valid issues that the borough could take up, or would that not matter? Because we don't want to necessarily presuppose that all the recommendations will be accepted. That's my first question. Yeah, and I think I'll stick just with that answer. Let's see if we can deal with that one first. Yeah.
I think you can see at the top of the document, and of course we might revise this, add to it, streamline it a bit more. When you go to page 2 and it's the executive summary of recommendations, I would envision that the council would go through each of these and hold something that is either a vote or some analog to a vote about each one of them. And then depending on how that shakes out, they might assign this implementation committee exactly what they have arrived at.
Yes. Yes, that was sort of what I was thinking too. So, sort of the charge or the specifics of what the standing committee, quote unquote, standing committee might do is contingent on acceptance of at least some of the recommendations. So, we wouldn't necessarily know exactly which recommendations would be accepted in advance of knowing whether or not there's going to be a committee. So I imagine all this would be voted upon at the same time, with both the recommendations and the proposal or recommendation to have a standing committee would be all kind of a simultaneous act, and if there was a vote not to have a standing committee, we don't want to suggest that none of these recommendations could be implemented without such a body.
Agreed, Lou. I don't think that implies
No,
that
I just
here,
wanted to
though.
make sure that, yeah, right?
I mean, I think we've built it well that, like, one of our recommendations is the standing committee.
Right. But what if the I'm making this up. What if the recommendation for the standing committee is not accepted, but the recommendations are? And that's just sort of made up. What I'm saying is that we can have recommendation. The acceptance of some of the recommendations should not be solely contingent on having a standing committee. Although that would be the most efficient way, in our view, to implement any of them or all of them.
Agreed. And I don't think the way
Yeah.
this is written really.
No, I just wanted to make
Implies
sure that
that.
I understood.
I think we're.
Okay.
Although, Lou, are you trying to raise the possibility that we might want to like prioritize or rank order
Yes.
these? Okay, that's something to consider.
So I have a suggestion as far as the future of the committee or the future of the commission. And I think what I was attempting to do was first gain some commission sourcing, temperature checking on what our thoughts might be on what I'm about to propose. So in our community, we do have an anti-racist development institute at Dickinson Law. And the work of that institute, and admittedly, I'm actually the program manager for that institute. It's a fairly new initiative in our community, but I do think that there is some real value in what that institute can do with regard to the recommendations that we're making tonight. So a couple of words that we've already said tonight: implementation and perennial. And the Anti-Racist Development Institute uses an iterative design thinking approach to problem solving. And so walking through the steps of design thinking in an iterative fashion, beginning with empathy and brainstorming and prototyping and testing out potential solutions to racist policies or programming. And so as we're thinking about a bridge for the recommendations, whether we prioritize them ourselves or whether council prioritizes them, but really being able to take advantage of the institute in a way that allows for some of the really practical steps of implementing these recommendations. I bring it up for, obviously for a couple of reasons. One, because I think it's a natural fit for the things that we are trying to do. And because we are located in the same community, the subscription format is in a testing phase. And so being able to take advantage of that testing phase, certainly at a reduced rate, et cetera, can benefit the borough in that way, but then ultimately the folks closest to the pain and most vulnerable in our communities. And so I'm wondering what our thoughts might be on including that as a sort of bridge recommendation or additional recommendation with regard to the future of the commission.
Clarificatory question. You mentioned rate, as in these services would come at a cost to the borough?
That's correct.
I think we have a few options there. We could include the Institute amongst some of the collaborative partners that we list in these recommendations. Or we could also communicate to the implementation committee in these subpoints here that there is this resource available in our community.
I think either would work. I more favor the former because it just keeps it a cleaner, in my mind, it keeps it a cleaner document with respect to recommendations. But probably either approach would be fine.
I guess I really don't see the Institute as a partner organization, but more along the lines of how the future of this work is carried out. So when we're talking about Chief Diversity Officer and talking about a standing committee, with the understanding that a standing committee does some of the same things over and over again, I think it's imperative to add some structured element to that.
One concern I would have about the Institute taking over all of these charges is that my understanding, and this could be mistaken, is that the focus of the center is anti-racist work and that our scope is broader than that.
Well, I think that's what that speaks to the origination in spirit, if nothing else, of this commission was very much rooted in racial disconnect and racism and white supremacy in our community. And in my mind, I've always kept that as a place of origin for this work and for this commission.
I'd say my personal lack of familiarization with this organization, and I hesitate to say more because I just don't know enough about the organization.
A question about that too is what would the nature of the accountability to the borough council be when you have a standing committee, or when you have a committee that's not standing but that is something like an implementation committee? They are appointed by the borough council, and I just would worry about having an implementation structure that isn't functionally analogous to the other implementation structures in the borough.
With regard to the Institute?
Yeah, maybe I was misunderstanding your proposal, but I thought you were sort of suggesting that maybe in lieu of the implementation committee,
No.
there's this other group that.
No. Yeah, so not in lieu.
Okay.
No, it was the way I may have understood. The way I understood it would be more of a partnership, or, and that was probably, that's also probably a bad term, collaborator, something of that sort.
I'm looking at it as an organization with whom the borough could contract to help the implementation committee work through defining practical logistical steps to the implementation process.
Okay, with that, in my view, that's a bridge too far for where we're headed today, in my view. We're looking at some recommendations, some of which may not be accepted or may need to be rewickered by the implementation committee, and the expectation or hope that we will have an implementation committee, that one would be the borough would accept that recommendation and press ahead to then go and further define what the implementation committee does beyond the recommendations that we have here, I think is a bridge too far. It might be something we might consider after the borough votes on whether we can have a standing committee or not. And then if that is positive and we can have one, then we can go back and do the sort of work that you're suggesting. That's just my view.
Yeah, so I mean, implementation committee is the language that we've used, but it could also be employed by the chief diversity officer and or by borough staff without a committee or without an officer. So that's again a reason why I don't necessarily see it as listed with partnership, but rather a potential solution / recommendation for how we can advance anti-racism, inclusivity, equity, justice, et cetera, in our community.
I'm just thinking it over. Like, a lot of our recommendations already do have some implied partnership, or we're leveraging other resources in the community. I don't see it as a huge risk to at least make the recommendation that we consider them, especially for a body of perpetuity.
I just spent a bit of time on the website for that institute, and I noticed that it's very scholarly, and it kind of excludes community. That's my impression, right? And the scholarly part of it is great, but it is important to be specific about what's happening here, and the whole purpose of the work that's being done so far was to discover where the problems are right in the community. So if the assumption is that things are happening similar everywhere for the same reasons, and that's acceptable, then maybe it would have a good result. But that might not be true. And my experience tells me that there are really specific things happening in different areas that need to be recognized. And yeah, so that's my comment.
I'm not sure if a response is warranted, but it definitely does have a community element. That's certainly a part of it. It's scholarly because it's at a school, and I'll just say this too, that we haven't had the best results with the very first part of that design process, is empathizing with the user and defining what those needs are, definitive needs statement. We have not been successful in that way.
Yeah.
And I think intentionally and purposefully, systematically engaging in that process as part of as the means, as part of that process, helps to make more practical the steps that can be and should be taken to eradicate racism in our community.
Can you expand on the community element of the work you're doing, or that's being done? Like, just because I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
So it launched 3 months ago. And so the part of the draw at this point for the borough would be to be in that testing phase, in our beta testing, right, at a significantly reduced financial burden. As far as communities uh, there are a number of other communities in cooperation with the Pennsylvania Municipal League who we are in conversations with, as well as a few other organizations that aren't schools. Um, and so I think that as that work becomes more prevalent and as future iterations of that work, there would be more to say about it.
Thank you.
How about this for a proposal to strike a compromise between the comments I've been hearing? On the future of the commission's work, we could add something like urge the implementation committee to seek the support of organizations in the community already performing this type of work, such as the Anti-Racist Institute.
Yeah, but we're not doing this work. And I think this is where I struggle. For a long time, I think we've looked to organizations to craft and adhere to a mission that points to specific pains and ills that individuals in our communities face. And I think that's great in theory, but much like many diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts can tend to be more performative than actionable. And I think in order to get to the need of a people, in order to get a community motivated, an organization, an institution, a local government entity, right, to get these institutions moving is to really put some weight on the empathizing and defining stages of that process and finding out what those needs, what are the specific needs, what is the specific policy, and then how do we prototype a solution around that. That's not work that we are doing for anyone, but we're helping people through that process. We're helping organizations through that process. So we're not the purveyors of it. We're the helpers. We're the collaborators. We'll work with you to do it. That's what the ADI does. But it's not a diversity, equity, and inclusion professional organization. That's not. It's an institute that helps make practical anti-racism.
I don't know that I agree that we're not doing that work, and I'm of the opinion that this committee and no one on this committee has been engaged in a performance. I think it's all been sincere work.
I'm sorry. Can I just clarify? I was referring to the ADI.
Okay.
Yeah.
What? Sorry. What's ADI?
Anti-Racist Development Institute.
ADI. Okay. Anti-Racist Development Center. ADIC. Institute.
Anti-Racist Development Institute.
Anti-racist. Okay. Thanks.
Is this something? I mean, I know our commission's lifetime is coming to a close, but could we educate ourselves on it a bit more in the month to come and just consider how we word it into this? It just, from personal standpoint, I've not had any time to check it out at all.
I think legislatively, our options are, we could call the question now and vote on how this is. We could say, let's vote on this part of the proposal next time. How do we feel preliminarily about the change I just typed in there? Urge the implementation committee to seek the support of organizations in the community who are performing this type of work, such as the Dickinson Law Anti-Racist Development Institute. And then we can take some time to think about whether we'd like to urge some kind of financial commitment that would be out of step with any other recommendations we've made. So we can set this aside and return later.
I really
I'm
like
good
that.
with that.
I don't see the changes.
I like that idea.
in the document?
Oh, you're not on page 15. Back at the
At the
bulletin.
bullet list, yep. Anyone object to proceeding that way?
Thank you.
Could I ask a couple questions just for some clarity on this one? And I'll start with the latter issue first, just to clarify the as the commission goes forward over the next month, considering what role an organization like the ADI or the ADI would have. Is it a suggestion that they would be sort of a facilitator to help create a framework around which the work would occur? I just want to make sure I'm understanding the proposal.
I think that's a general scope.
Okay. And then the second question is, and I think maybe it was alluded to a little bit here. Implementation is one thing. Some form of somewhat independent oversight, I think, has been thrown around over the last several months too, which I think would be important and probably better done if the options are staff, a newly hired position, or a committee, although appointed by council, having a term that would be longer than, or at least the length of a term of council, so that there, as there is changeover on council, that committee isn't constantly changing with the political winds. I would think a committee that has that type of term would be better placed to have some sort of oversight role. I don't see that clearly in the description on page 15. If that's at all intended, I was just kind of throwing that out there, maybe as an issue for discussion here.
What do y'all think?
And I should, I asked for clarification. I should clarify what I just said too. When I talk about oversight, maybe it's clear to everybody, but I'm talking about the accountability oversight, ensuring that the work is continuing.
I think it's a necessary element.
I agree. Good idea.
So concretely, what we will say is add perhaps one more sentence that clarifies that this committee will be in an oversight role.
Well, excuse me. I don't think that the implementation committee is necessarily the independent oversight because they are appointed by council.
To have a, well, okay, let's talk about that then, because to have a body created by council, that body is going to be appointed by council. So if there's going to be a truly independent body, how is that body created, and how is that body formed, and who fills the positions on that body?
I mean, isn't that sort of a non-starter? We would have to have like a referendum or have the committee elected independently.
Right, and that would require a pretty heavy lift to have the last option there, to have a committee elected independently, and I'm not sure that's the best either, because political winds shift even more quickly sometimes among the populace than it does on council. But that would require an amendment to the Home Rule Charter, which is a relatively drawn out process that would probably take at least 2 years to get through, and it would require a couple votes by the electorate.
just as a comment, and yeah, I appreciate, Mr. Mayor, those remarks. An inspector general, for example, within an organization is considered an oversight body, but is not completely independent from the chief in many cases of the organization. That does pose some challenges with the term independence, but for our role here, I don't think that's a problem. The fact that the notion that a standing committee was appointed by council doesn't at all compromise what I think we're getting at in terms of oversight, in my view. There's a way one might set it up to say, well, the body answers to the mayor, who is a member of council, but also serves an additional role, something of this sort. But I don't really see that as, for what we're doing here, as problematic at all. And given the heavy lift that the mayor has mentioned that we would have to undertake to make it truly independent, if such a thing really exists, I question that. We did discuss, and I digress, but we did have, some scholarly commentary and assistance in our group. We had a professor who was quite knowledgeable on restorative justice and the like, and we said at the very start that there has to be some scholarly guidance as we go forward for the TRC. And I think all we're arguing here is that whatever standing committee or whatever body might be created once this body is dissolved, that it should also have similar scholarly foundations. And they may come from this organization, this institute that we're talking about. It may come from multiple institutions. I don't even think we have to decide that here at this point, but other than to say like or such as, and if we want to make mention to those organizations that we know could be helpful. So those are my remarks.
An additional thought I have about pursuing a version of the future of this commission that would have more independent oversight than a standing committee or a temporary committee is that, perhaps I'm naive, but coming out of the election season, I feel the mood in the country is less adversarial. I feel hopeful that there will be enough independence in a standing committee.
This is just speaking to ADI. I'm on the website and I'm just reading about it. And, questions come up when I look at who funds this, where all the funds come from. The fact that it comes through Penn State Dickinson Law, who is actually used to be Dickinson Law for many years and then was bought by Penn State in 2016 or something. So questions come to my mind about the direction it's going. So anti-racist is great, but I see an exclusion of Indigenous representation here, very much so. I see that. I understand, and as I mentioned last week, I see that even though we're in Carlisle Borough, there is not a lot of, even in the minutes that are being proposed, although there are in draft form, there's under arts and community, I can't remember. There's something about commemorating, and that word is not acceptable. As far as truth and reconciliation, because we're not commemorating, we want to change policies that are creating harms. So right now within the Indigenous community, it's a big deal that there's the issue, what I know of it as Atlaw, which the rhetoric around it is quite disturbing, and a lot of the rhetoric comes from the Christian communities who have different flavors, but I don't see that represented in Anti-Racist Development Institute in any way. Actually, probably a month ago now, I spent time just looking at who's being consulted, who's writing the chapters for this legal, um, for the training courses and for having law be anti-racist practice. So I could be wrong, and please correct me if I am, but I don't see that represented here. And there was something that came up in social media that I was, the term of human equity, right? So just the use of human in a legal context is problematic because we do have embedded in Canadian law and in American law the notion that Indigenous in North America are not human, and that continues, right? So I'm speaking these because I'm in this place and it's relevant. It's relevant to our talk right now. Are we going to practice anti-racist, embed anti-racist policies, but ignore those very foundational issues?
I can provide answers to both of those. As far as the Penn State piece, we are a Commonwealth campus of Penn State. However, when it comes to funding, we are intentional in pursuing independent funding, and that's also very intentional. And I would like to say maybe questions of those sort aren't best answered in a public meeting because they would speak to negotiations with the contractor. And I'm probably not comfortable having those conversations in a public meeting. And also recognizing the boundary and need to be mindful of that. With regard to Indigenous representation, that is very much a part of what is happening with the book series, not only in the folks who are present, but also the material about which they are writing.
Okay, commissioners, I think we agreed to set aside the issue of the Anti-Racist Development Institute. We'll return to those, the recommendations that concern that institute at the next meeting. Rhonda, you bring up an excellent point about the arts and public education recommendations. How do we feel about going to page 3 of this document and sort of looking at the bullet list and making sure that in that brief form we are on board with these recommendations? And since the word choice commemorate has been brought into question, we can start with arts and public education. Does anyone have an objection to moving through each of those? Nope. Okay. So the first recommendation reads, the borough should create 2 positions, 1 faculty and 1 student, to operate as liaisons between the Carlisle area school districts and the borough council. Suggestions, objections? I'm going to move pretty quickly here. 6:44. Is that okay with everyone? Okay. The borough should establish or partner with an existing educational body to educate community members on topics of racial injustice and discrimination and their effects. Okay, and then here's where we need a little wordsmithing. The current word is, the current sentence reads, the Carlisle Borough should partner with local Indigenous representatives to understand how to better commemorate Indigenous culture and educate the public on the complicated and troubling past relationship in the Carlisle Indian School. Maybe that should be, first of all, to the official name is Carlisle Indian Industrial School. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Could with or yeah, either way. And then what would be a way to more accurately capture what we're trying to say? I agree, commemorate is not the correct term.
how to develop a positive relationship with indigenous nations.
I don't think that's the point of the recommendation, though. I think what is being um, what's being recommended isn't necessarily about relationship or um, or policies, but rather because it's under arts and public education. So we're speaking to culture and how to better um, revere.
But to your point, it's a live culture, so it is about
Yeah, it's a
relationships with.
live culture, and I, as a Ojibwe woman, I don't want to come to Carlisle and see myself represented in past in terms that talk about the past, because I am a living person, and arts and culture for me is, the waters are full of life, like they need to be. The land is growing medicines like I need. Culture is not putting a plaque up and saying I used to, whoever giving information. It's living and it's active. So
Then I think that that's a
yeah,
separate recommendation because the the way that it it's one sentence, two clauses, right? And to educate people on the past. So if we if these are two separate actions that we need to do toward two different things, then it probably should be separated out.
well, I don't know where this recommendation came from. So I wouldn't want to have a commemoration. What I want to have is what is uh, in contemporary times known as land back action. And what that is actually have things here that that were erased and have them put back in place. So this is really um, enlivening
Yeah.
our lives and the community's lives. And this would be what it is.
I'll just say too, as one of the original authors of this section, we didn't have your perspective at that time, um, but I'm more inclined to incorporate your language because I think you bring a perspective for us that certainly trumps my own understanding of it. So that's my like. I'm more than happy for us to change the language around what you feel would be positive, and apologies if we didn't maybe get that right the first time around.
Thank you.
Yes, I concur with that. And, we had some dialogue, offline about this term, human security. Human security endeavors to preserve all cultures, but you still raise a point. If culture has been damaged, taken away, erased, the issue of preservation becomes very much like the issue of commemoration, like the plaque, but no more. Used to be. So I get your point on that now, much more clearly, and I think I agree with Raz. I think we can re-wicker this a bit to capture precisely what you've brought up. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Lou.
Rhonda, how does this language strike you? I think we could, to Tawanda's suggestion, we could split we could split this one recommendation into two. The first part is the Carlisle Borough should partner with local Indigenous representatives to better understand Indigenous cultures, plural, and enter into a restorative, respectful relationship with them.
The component it's missing is actually doing some specific action. So somehow like I like it a lot, but if you can keep some sort of action there, and we don't have to define it.
Mm-hmm. one thing we discussed, and I don't know that it made it into this, and maybe it did actually, because that's where the commemorate language came from, is that we were looking for a more interactive, not past looking, but an interactive experience as you walk through our town, where, for instance, uh, any institutions in this town who may have contributed to the cultural genocide associated with the Carlisle Indian Industrial School could take ownership of that and designate that they participated in some way in their past.
Right. That's precisely right. That was the intent when earlier in the commission's work. So as Raz said, the language is imperfect, of course, but that was the intent. So we just need to try to capture some language that we can be satisfied with that embodies that intent.
Yeah, and just I'm just seeing myself, reading something, and what I want to see there is what's being done now to correct that. Like, not just the information that this happened in the past, but what's being done to correct that. Because those stagnant things, my theory perhaps, create harms in people. Even as young people are growing up in a community and they're absorbing all this, they're getting messages about it. I want those messages to be toward life and to give hope for anybody encountering them. As they also learn these understandings of what is happening right now. Yeah. So thanks for your words, Emily.
They were coming through you.
Oh.
We could add a recommendation to the future of this commission. Perhaps there should be a standing committee or some sort of formal body that is focused solely on restorative relationships with indigenous cultures in this area, given the history of the Carlisle Indian Industrial School.
Yes, I think that's an excellent idea. Some of that was tangential to our original intent. Carlisle has a specific responsibility because of what happened in the past and the industrial school and how it is still the indigenous culture here is commemorated. We may have an additional responsibility when compared to some other city or town or area that, with respect to taking action as opposed to simply understanding. So I get your point, and I think the language can be improved, and we're getting much closer to that now.
Okay, so in the future of the commission's work, I've added a question mark, Indigenous Communities Specific Committee or Group, where, we aren't in a position in the next month to delineate action steps to repair those relationships, but could we say that's what this group would do if we agree that that's the right direction to go? Going back up here. Now we need to fix this bullet point and educate the public on the complicated and troubling past relationship with the Carlisle Indian Industrial School. Should we say something like the Carlisle Borough should undertake efforts to
I'm wondering if there's a need for the borough to research their own relationship with the school.
Thanks, Twanda, for stating that, because at some point, and maybe it's in here, I didn't get to read it ahead of time, because whatever.
because it was very late.
Yeah.
Apologies.
No, it's that is something that when I was having a conversation with one of the counselors that came forward, and I think it has a lot of value, but I think some of that work has been done. Right? And I don't know how much of it might still need to be done. But yeah, it's a good, like with a critical eye, looking at what things are still operative, and are they. Yeah, it's an internal process of an anti-racist with an anti-racist lens. So that's great.
Ronnie, could I make one other request if you wouldn't mind? We expanded then on that recommendation number 3 on page 9. Would you at some point take a look over that too, and just we've wordsmithed now the overall recommendation, but some of the body to that as well. I think we'll need some correction.
I want to dangle a possibility out here. First, I want to take responsibility. This draft report was woefully delayed, and it is not the case that folks had enough time to read it and really digest it. And for that, I apologize. It is almost 7 o'clock, and we haven't made it through even a quarter of the recommendations. So I might suggest that we hold an additional meeting in addition to the December 10th meeting, where we further workshop this draft after everyone has had an opportunity to look at it in one place. I think it's really valuable that we gathered here today because we have worked out some things that weren't previously worked out, but we might all benefit from taking some time to read this, digest it, make comments, meet and workshop it at another time. So let me just float that idea and see what you think about it.
I'm good with that idea.
No objections to that idea.
Without objection.
Works.
Yeah, right. We always have a hard time finding. Yeah, fair enough. So question remains about. So it's nearing 7 o'clock. How much more time we would like to spend this evening? Would we like to spend the next few minutes finding another date and then reinvest our energy?
It'd probably be best in the interest of time if we look for another date that works.
Okay. Would you all mind getting your calendars out? I know I'm out of town next week, so that's a no-go for me. Of course, we can work asynchronously on this. How about Monday the 28th? That's 2 weeks from now.
What time?
Flexible for me. It would have to be in the evening, but anytime after 5.
Would this be a public meeting like this, or no? Because Harb is on the 28th if it is, so there's another meeting.
It would need to be if you're talking about the merits of the recommendations. I mean, you don't need all this space, right?
Right.
You can do it in the conference room.
I
I have a board meeting on the 28th.
Okay, well that doesn't work anyways.
How about Thursday the 24th? Oh, wait, that's Thanksgiving. Never mind. I hate my family. I'm kidding. What's today, the 10th? Because we could, no, today's the 14th. We could meet.
Is anyone around the 20? When are you back?
I'm gone that whole week.
That Saturday?
I'm gone that Saturday. How about the 29th? Never mind, I can't do the 29th. I'm in Houston. Then Monday the 5th is the Monday before the Monday we regularly meet. Monday, December 5th.
What time?
Anytime after 5.
I
Um,
could do that after 5.
Instead of meeting like in that way, can we just work on it using the power of Google Docs um, and edit it that way?
That's what Google's hoping for. Harnessing the power of Google. Yes, I do think we can asynchronously work on it. Do folks feel that that would be sufficient? Do we need another in-person meeting before our? Because at the next meeting, we're voting. That's our last meeting, and our committee dissolves unless we ask the borough for more time. Or we could have planned an additional meeting in December. We could treat the 10th of December as a another preliminary meeting, and then hold a meeting.
12th to me.
Yeah, what count? I don't even know. I'm like one of those people who's looking at like a 2018 calendar.
Yeah, we could work on it online, and everybody, and come to something that we agree on, and then meet to vote. If we have to vote in person, then meet to vote on it.
Okay. So I'm hearing.
But
Ron
if
to
we
say-
don't have to meet in person, then we could vote using online.
I think we have to vote in person.
Okay. Yeah. So then we could have our vote at our next meeting.
Okay. So Rhonda's suggesting an idea. Asynchronous work. We vote on the 12th. How do we feel about it?
I have no objection to that.
I worry about that for one, because we're essentially, even though it's asynchronous, we're essentially discussing the merits of the recommendations, and so for that to not be public, or for folks to not be able to for the public to not be able to comment on that discussion, I think is not a good thing. And then I'm also keeping in mind too that meeting on the 12th is before council's meeting on the 15th, and so having a voted on thing done, unless we are going to ask them for more time on the 12th. I'm back to suggesting that we meet before the 12th.
Okay. Let's look back at that week of December 5th. I can make any evening that week work except for Thursday the 8th.
Just one quick correction, the council meeting is on the 8th because the workshop is.
Oh, it's
the
December's 1st.
Yeah. Just
Okay.
I don't know if that changes your.
It does.
Yeah.
It does.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Sure. Because it's the second Thursday, so our workshop's technically in November, even though it's for December. But the way the month falls.
So then, can I? Excuse me. Will council have an opportunity to review anything, even in draft form, before their next meeting?
Well, if it's provided to us, we could review a draft at any point. There's no magic time to do that. Or do you mean review publicly, or review as part of a sort of a briefings that we get from time to time that we review?
I guess what I'm considering is that council remains the same, and that there wouldn't be any new persons that need to be onboarded to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission as far as function.
There
isn't.
absent someone resigning and us appointing someone new, there will not be any changes over the next year.
No resignation.
I'll let council know that they cannot resign.
So then we don't really lose anything if you all don't receive a voted on document until your January meeting.
That's correct. I mean, to the extent that there would be a period of time where we have to then act on an ordinance that would establish that whatever we'll call the committee. I mean, there's going to be some delay in that, but as far as council's action on the recommendations, if we had them at the end of December, we'd be able to act on them at our January meeting.
Okay.
I'm free that week, the week of the 5th.
I am as well.
It works for me.
I'd prefer that too because the 12th I'll be out of town.
Hmm.
5th is
Would
fine.
you be able to zoom in?
Yeah, maybe. Probably.
Because that's when we'd be voting on them. This would be a workshop meeting for the recommendation.
I can find work, but it would be cool to have a workshop.
Jerry, how about you? The 5th?
Yeah.
Works? Okay. The 5th at 6 o'clock?
And it's here, we're saying?
I don't know. Is it?
Yeah,
Can it be here?
it's free that, you're free, the 5th is free of meetings.
Great. Come right back here. Excellent.
So the idea is that we work online to perfect it.
I think that to Tawanda's point, substantive changes at this point, asynchronously, let's stay away from that. But fine tuning, correcting grammatical errors, fixing formatting, locating words that you want to place under discussion, please feel free. Much encouraged.
Yeah, I think there are some functions that, like you said, flagging or highlighting or putting a pin in things electronically, I think. But substantive conversation about a thing should be done in public.
So I can go ahead and review it and put my comments, and you will each read it, and then the two co-chairs will decide what is substantive to bring forward in a public.
No,
No,
I'm not
nothing
saying
that-
that at all.
Oh,
Nothing
okay.
that heavy-handed. You can. We all know how to use the editing and commenting functions here.
Okay.
I think feel free to raise things for discussion. I would consider that akin to agenda development. It would be as though you came to talk to us about something that you would like to have appear on an agenda for discussion, and we won't go through and thumbs up or thumbs down anyone's comments. The idea is that they'll all come forward as part of the agenda at the 5th.
Great.
Everyone clear?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. So, any new business? Great. Updates from Borough Council / staff.
I think I may have mentioned previously that for the upcoming budget year, not knowing exactly how much would be requested from TRC, if anything, in the borough budget, we kept the $32,000 that was budgeted for this year and carried that over as a budget line for next year. So there's presently at least $32,000 that tomorrow night at our budget hearing will be part of the draft budget that council will be considering. And I should mention too, both the co-chairs received an email from Borough Manager Armstrong, the same as other chairs of our various boards as part of our strategic planning process, where the facilitator wants to get a sense from different boards, at least the chairs, and their interactions with borough government through that process. So nothing into the details of the work of this commission or any of the boards, more of a sort of higher level, what's it like being part of the borough kind of thing. And that's all I have.
Thank you.
Time for public comment. Stephanie, do we have anyone online for public comment?
No comments raised their hand or enter in the chat.
Thank you. Anyone present for public comment? Thank you. We did have an opportunity to go through our future meeting schedule, but I will pause to see if any of my colleagues have any announcements to share. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for your grace and patience and attention this evening. With that, our agenda concludes. This meeting is officially adjourned.